Welcome to our viewers from across the state. My name is Zukiewicz, and I'm a founder and artistic director of the Beethoven and the Rockies concert series. Today, we have a very special virtual event, a conversation with some of the most familiar voices on the Colorado Public Radio, Marilyn Cooley and David Ginder. This event is made possible by the generous support of the Envirotech Services, Bank of Colorado, and an anonymous donor. So Marilyn and David are hosts and producers at the CPR, and we're very grateful that they could join us today. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Adam. We're so happy to be here. It's been so long since we've seen you. We have to do something.
It's true. So David, my first question is, are you in the closet?
That's a reasonable question to ask. Yes, since wow, what year is it? It's since March 2020. We have been doing all of our shows remotely from home. And, you know, the question is, when you're trying to build a studio, you have two problems. One is to eliminate outside sound, you know, the airplane going by, the garbage truck going by, whatever. So you find a room that has big solid walls that won't let sound inside. The other problem is to have a room that's pretty dead. In other words, the exact opposite of a cathedral. You know, if you're standing in a cathedral and you sing, "Whoa," 5 seconds later, you're still hearing it because the sound is bouncing around all that stone. Well, that is lovely if you're in the cathedral, but if you're in a radio studio talking to a microphone, it just muddles the sound. And the people listening at the radios can't understand what you're saying. So you want a room that has no reflective surfaces. And the ideal room in a house that meets all of those requirements is a closet. It's small. It's usually in the center of the house someplace, so it's not hearing the buses go by. And it's got all this stuff hanging in here, which is absorbing the sound and making it very anti-cathedral like. So that's that in long version is why we do our shows from the closet.
And did it take you long to set up everything to work remotely? Was that a long process?
Interesting. We started on March 13th, and I think it was decided on March 11th that we were going to try this on the 13th. So we were handed laptops and microphones, and we set something up very quickly, and it was kind of primitive. And over the 18 months, it has evolved. So I now have a second screen so I can look at two things at once, which is very important in hosting a radio show. And I've built a table so that my monitors are at the correct level and the microphone's at the correct level and the keyboard's at the correct level. You know, but when you commit yourself to doing something for a period of time, you make it work. So it's been interesting and fun, I guess.
Has it been the same for you, Marilyn?
Pretty much. I'm very grateful that David is so good at things like building tables. And so I've had all the benefits of David's work because I don't know if people know, but we've been married for 30 years and we met in radio. And here we still are. But so we're in the same house, and lucky for me, David's got everything set up. So yes, I'm very grateful for that. And it works well. So I really do love that all those coats and a lot of ties, David.
Which I haven't worn in 18 months.
Right. Well, the thing is they absorb sound perfectly. And it's, you know, in that sense, it's really great for a radio studio. I can't complain. It's great.
That's wonderful. So it sounds like you're an excellent team. And so I'm wondering,
we're used to working together. We should say it.
Right.
Like
you mentioned 30 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit how you met, how it was on the radio when you met?
Shall I?
Sure. I'll interject. Go ahead.
Thank you. Color. Well, yes. I worked for WETA classical radio in Washington, D.C. for 32 years. And after I'd been there for a couple of years, they said, well, we need to hire a new announcer. And David was one of the applicants. And I listened to that voice and I said, wow, that guy is a star. We absolutely need that person on our air. Well, luckily, they agreed with me. David was hired and he walked in and I kind of got the little star eyes and it all worked out well for me. So here we are. We actually met when David came to work at the station where I was already working.
And we like to talk about, studios when they're built, not in a closet, are smallish rooms with big, heavy doors and padding on the walls. And we like to talk about romance in soundproof rooms. That's how it all started.
It is quite interesting because even though you're in soundproof small rooms, they're airing for millions of people.
It's a miracle, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is.
I love radio.
So since we're talking about this, how did you start with the radio? What drew you to this profession?
May I start?
Please do.
Most of the people who are in this business, I would say, fell into it accidentally. They're people who have a French degree and don't know what to do with it, or they're people who have a music education degree and found out I don't like to teach, or they have a cello degree in performance and they want to play in the Cleveland Orchestra, but they're not good enough to play in the Cleveland Orchestra. So all of these people have a great background to do this kind of work. And typically the classical music radio business is drawn from that group of people. Music enthusiasts, often people who have music degrees, but weren't really thinking about radio in the first place. I'm the exception. I always wanted to do this. When I was growing up, in junior high school and high school, we always listened to the classical music radio station. And I thought, that is so cool. I want to do that. So I pursued a degree in music. I have not a performance degree, but I did study piano and I did study cello and played in the orchestra and so forth. And when I got to school, they had it was a college radio station and they wanted something, college radio is, what are we going to do to fill this 2-hour block? It's rock music at night, but what are we going to do in the afternoon to fill and meet our obligations to serve the public interest and so forth? I walked in and said, I want to do a classical show. They just rolled out the red carpet and there I was. In school, I was not only going to school, but hosting a classical music radio show as well. That's great fun and an unusual start, I would say, to the business.
Wonderful. What about you, Marilyn?
Well, I belong to the category that David described first. I was a music major, and at first I was a voice major. And we discovered in my junior year that, number one, I'm really not a good singer. And we also learned that I didn't have that drive to be on the stage and perform. I was a first soprano, and that means a high voice. And I just realized, it took me a while to say, I'm an introvert and I really just don't want to be on a stage. So as it turned out, then I went on to get my degrees in music studies. I mean, my graduate degree is in musicology. That's like somebody who doesn't maybe perform best and they do other things. That would be me, not to denigrate any musicologists, of course. But I found that once I had these degrees and didn't know what to do with it, it dawned on me that I'd been listening to classical radio all my life. And I said, maybe I could do that. And it turned out that my local station was willing to train me on how to operate the machinery so that I could run my own board, because that's how it's been at all my stations. But because I'd been a singer, I had some idea how to articulate speech. And also I was somewhat familiar with classical music. Those things served me very well, and I had them done already. So it worked out very well for me. I was actually trained at a station, and it was great. And I had some background that helped me get ahead in that, I think.
I'm wondering, you're mentioning your voice, your vocal studies background. I wonder if there are any special techniques or any kind of things that you do to take care of your voice, since your work is basically dependent on it. Is there anything that you do to protect it, to, I don't know, exercise somehow?
Do you want to answer?
Please go ahead.
My answer to your question is no, not a thing. And however, I will say that I live a healthy lifestyle. You know, I exercise, I eat healthy food. But in terms of, you know, warm-ups, I don't do that. No. On the other hand, I do make sure, you know, I do the morning show, so it's early when I start. I do make sure that I'm awake. And I don't mean just, you know, awake. I mean, awake, alert, be able to put thoughts together in my head. And once you achieve that level of awakeness, then the voice comes awake as well. And I seem to be able to host a morning show.
I think so.
So the short answer is no.
So moving on from this, I wonder, working at the radio station, I'm sure it has many challenges. As you mentioned, some of it was just a very little time that you had to put together the studio during the pandemic. Of course, this is not an ordinary time, but I do wonder, what is the most challenging aspect of your work? If you can share us a little bit, or maybe there are more than one.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Marilyn? I have something.
Go ahead. I'm puzzling it over.
Oh, okay. I think the most difficult thing is when you're hosting at a very emotional time. And I would mention two days, the day of September 11th and the days after September 11th. Those were really hard times. I mean, we all went through what was happening on the September 11th attacks, but to be on the radio and to be a host under those conditions was a huge challenge. And before I talk about it, how I wrapped my head around that, I'll also mention when there's a death that is close to the radio family. I was hosting at WBTA in Washington, and the longtime host had a stroke. Actually,
morning host.
It was on the air, yeah. And he died a short time later, and I was the one on the air the next day, and that was extremely difficult. And what I realized was that the way to handle a situation like that is really an extreme example of how I handle any situation on the radio, and that is be myself. Just, if we're grieving together, that's okay. That's what we're doing together. If we're just can't believe what happened yesterday on September 11th, that's okay. I don't need to be a polished professional, you know, under circumstances like that. And I think those events really crystallized what I think being a radio host is all about for me in a huge way. And that is, we're just being ourselves. You know, we love this music. We want to invite people to welcome this music into their lives. And we do that by not by being announcers, but by being people and hosts. And those examples that I just gave of very stressful times really crystallized that for me.
Thank you for sharing. It's very, very personal, very important.
And so beautifully said. I can't possibly add anything to it. I agree completely.
Thank you. I'm wondering, in the situations like that, when you have this kind of stressful times, and I imagine you're being yourself, you're being supported by your radio station, by the listeners and everybody else. I would imagine it helps to go through this eventually, to be able to somewhat move on, if it's even possible, and to some extent. Is that how the process goes? Because you going through all these emotions while you're on air in front of so many people, there's really no no place to hide. In some ways, I guess I'm interested in finding out a little bit more about this, if you're willing to share, because to some extent, it's also a little bit like being a performing musician in some way. When you're on stage, you also have to share the innermost feelings that you have, regardless of the situation outside. And I wonder if there are any parallels here between how you go through the process and how a lot of performing musicians might go through the same process.
Yes, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
I think there is a connection, Adam, that makes a lot of sense. This is like the difference for you between performing for an audience and making a recording of a piece. So you get information from the presence of those listening that helps you understand how your communication is happening. And that informs how you play and how you interact with your fellow musicians, and in a sense, how you interact with the audience as well. When you're recording, you don't get that feedback. And that's a different kind of challenge. Because you're kind of by yourself. You can, if you're not doing a solo performance, you have other musicians there who can help you understand your expression and how you'd like to present it. But if you're in a solo situation and you're recording something, you're in a closed room and it's often designed to sound a certain way. You've got a guy, running a board that affects how the end product happens. And to me, that's really very challenging, because we know that what we want to do is communicate with those about what beauty and hope there is that is brought to us by this music. That's why we're all here doing this work, because this music inspires us and we believe it can help the world. It can be challenging when you really don't know who you're talking to. And it is part of the job in radio to do your best, I think, to address everyone in a sense. So there's a fine line between how close do you get to something that's very, very personal. It depends on how universal that personal feeling might be, I think. I'm not sure if I've articulated that well, but
beautifully said.
It's a challenge, because you're there. I always used to say, people don't turn on the radio to hear me, but if I'm going to be there, I want to be something that feels safe and welcoming and pleasant for people, and that lets them feel the music. I'm there to frame it maybe, but it's the music that's happening. And so there's a fine line about what's really suitable to say when you're on the radio, especially in circumstances such as David described.
Adam, I'm glad you brought up the parallels with being a musician, because I think the parallels are right on. When you're practicing, you're practicing your voicing and your finger exercises and playing fast passages, and if you're a string player, playing slowly and so forth. And all of those are technical things that you're working out. But when it's performing, you really have to kind of put those things aside and express what the piece expresses. For example, if you're the evangelist singing in one of the Bach passions about the story of Jesus, and you're in the chorus, and you have 1,016th notes, fast notes, and that's not what that's about. It's not about fast notes. It's about crucified. That's what the story is. That's what the essence of the passion is all about. So, you have to have the ability to play or sing those fast passages or high passages or whatever it is. But that's not what the story is. The story is what's happening in the music, what emotion, what story, where are you placed by the composer? And that has to be in your head and in your heart most when you're performing the music, with the technical abilities all ironed out in the past. And it's the same way when you're hosting a show. You know, you have to know what buttons to push, and you have to know how to read the clock, and you have to know how to join the news, and all these little things, which are all very complicated and take a long time to learn. But when you're hosting a show, it's about talking to people. It's about relating to people. It's about expressing why this piece is so important. And all of those technical things are being used, but that, you know, pressing buttons and reading the clock and all that is not what it's about. It's about, I love this music. I want to welcome you to love this music as well. And that's why I think it really is a parallel with what musicians do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughts, for the insights on this topic. It's so relevant for all of us, I think, to understand a little bit more about how you prepare, how you deal with different things in your work. And one thing that comes to mind, you were mentioning a little bit earlier, was in terms of drawing the parallels between the studio and the live events. I'm wondering, working for the radio station, you certainly have your fair share of pre-recorded materials and different conversations that you do on air live. I am wondering about different concerts. Have you done some things like that, like a live broadcast from different venues, perhaps from your station in Denver or wherever you might happen to be? So I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about how different it is for you when you do that from the work in the studio.
Well, Adam, you asked earlier what was very about the very difficult things about what we do. And one could easily look at a live broadcast where you're sitting in a booth somewhere and looking out at the stage. You have no idea when the conductor's going to come out. Maybe it'll be 5 minutes later than you thought. You have no idea if somebody's, you know, the soloist is going to break a string and have to do something quickly. You know, that kind of a situation could be challenging and scary because you as the host have to figure out what to do when the conductor doesn't come out for 5 minutes longer than expected. For whatever reason, I love that. That's not a scary challenge to me. Now, I admit I go to all live broadcasts very well prepared for the worst to happen. As a matter of fact, I think it was my last live broadcast not too long before the pandemic. The concert was, I think it started at 7:30. It was supposed to start at 7:30. The live broadcast started at 7:30. It never started until 7:46. That's 16 minutes of me. And you know, the thing is, in radio, if you have nothing to say, 30 seconds is forever. So as I usually go to a live broadcast, I was prepared with a lot of things, and it was fine. I really enjoyed the challenge, but you got to be super, super prepared. So to answer your questions, I love live broadcasts. I'm sure I wouldn't have wanted to do one when I was a young broadcaster, but now I think it's just a wonderful challenge, and I love it.
Wonderful, thank you. And what about you, Marilyn? Do you share the same?
Yes, to me, it's all really a matter of that preparation, because if you have the material there, much more than you'll ever need, then you can kind of just relax and say, now I'm going to enjoy this concert along with everybody who's listening. And if something suddenly comes up and there's a problem, you just grab one of those 15 things that you have right here and you just make it sound seamless. So it works out in the end.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I wonder, we're talking about challenges. I'm wondering, what is the most favorite thing about the work that you do?
That's hard to narrow it down.
Or maybe it could be multiple, I suppose, I guess.
Do you have one, Marilyn?
Let me talk about that for a moment while you collect your thoughts. The two most fun things for me are, number one, naturally, the music. And I think many people who listen to the radio, many people who are watching us today, have a deep sense in their hearts that this music is an important part of life, and it speaks directly to who you are. And that kind of love buoys me up when it's time to do anything with music. And it's one of those situations sometimes where it's like, wait, they pay me to do this, to spend time with what I love more than anything. It's really the music that's by far the most fun part of this for me, is because we love it so much. I mean, we do, right? That's part of why you do what you do, Adam.
Yes.
Also, for me, my hobby is words and language. And so it's a lot of fun for me to be able to say, okay, well, here's this Polish name. I don't want to bother Adam right now about exactly how that's pronounced. Let's see if I can figure out other ways, And as a singer, I had some very good training in the pronunciation of languages. You have to be able to sing it, even if you don't know what it means. So I had some good training in languages, and it's always a lot of fun for me, especially to track down somebody's name. Like, I said, where is this person from? And how does that language do this thing? Yeah, it's just a lot of fun for me to do the language. So you add up language, music, it's things that sound cool, and it's just the most fun ever.
Wonderful.
Adam, I would say my two favorite things are the live broadcasts for the reasons I just mentioned, about it being a challenge that I just love. And when it all comes together, you just feel so great. And the second thing I think that I would mention is fundraising.
Okay.
Because fundraising is, when we ask for money, we ask for donations on the air. It's very difficult because you're kind of saying the same thing over and over again, and trying to figure out interesting ways to convince people to part with their money, and they don't have to do that. But the reason I like it, so those are all reasons not to like it, but the reason I like it is because I feel a connection with listeners, I think, more than other times, because, this is what it all boils down to. We love this music. Let's all come together. Let's join together and just make it possible. And that becomes crystallized during the fundraising, even though it's exhausting.
So do you have any specific strategies or tactics that you use in terms of preparation for this, or perhaps how you go about doing this kind of fundraising campaigns?
For me, it's I have to come back to the fact that I do an early show. So it's being awake and really, the thought processes are actually working properly. And then I think it really boils down to what I was saying earlier about recognizing, the kind of the parallels with musicians. We have all these techniques that we use to do this, but what's really happening here is I'm talking to you and convincing you that you love this music. You like to listen to me bring you music on the radio, and I'm asking for you to make a donation, a small donation, which will help make it possible. That just recognizing the reality of what's happening here, I think, is the strategy that I employ. It's just the realism of the situation.
I see.
There have been times when we wake up screaming that phone number in the middle of the night. I'll admit that. but
this is true.
Another part of it is that the fundraising process at CPR has many elements to it. And so when you're preparing a broadcast and putting the things together, there's a little bit of juggling involved. And when fundraising comes around, there are many more objects to juggle. And so it can be a challenge, but again, it's fun because you feel like you're connecting. Hey, we all love this, really. I don't need to convince you that you love it. I know you love it. So let's all join together and make sure it continues. That's just a great feeling.
Yes. We're talking about many different things as we're discussing this. I'm wondering, you've been doing this for a number of years and you have tremendous experience and expertise in the intimacy of the radio workings. I'm wondering how much working at the radio station, at the classical radio station, has changed over the years. If you have any perspectives on that, and in terms of like how perhaps this is also an indication of how different it will look like in the future. Can you share with us some thoughts on that?
I would say technology is our friend. Back when I started, when we recorded an interview, first of all, we never did video interviews like this, but when we did an audio interview, we recorded it on magnetic tape. And if we wanted to edit something out, a boring answer to a question or whatever, a flub or
Or
whatever.
a boring question.
Or a boring question. It happens. You literally would take a single edge razor blade and cut the tape at the beginning of where you wanted to remove the excerpt and the end, and you'd bring them together and tape it with a piece of splicing tape. Sounds primitive. That's how it was done.
It sounds very labor intensive.
Yes, very. And if you make a mistake, it's awful because, the piece of tape that you need is now on the floor and you've accidentally stepped on it and it doesn't sound good anymore. So, I think about how we used to do this, and it's just amazing to me that we did. Now we do it by computer. And I say that the computer technology today, in terms of audio editing and audio production, the thing that's holding you back is your imagination. If you can think of it, you can do it. So it's very, very exciting to be able to do many, many new and different things with audio editing equipment based on computers today than the old Stone Age way we used to do it.
I see.
It's true. When I started, which was some years ago, the operation was done at a big audio board. Now, you've seen these guys maybe at concerts that have these huge rigs that do 1,000 things. In those days, we had all that. It didn't do 1,000 things, but it probably did 100. And today, everything we're doing is on a laptop, and you can take it with you. So just as David said, technology is your friend. And it really is nice. For example, if you have an interview and you need to have the person who was interviewed add an S to the end of a word to make it a plural, all of a sudden, you've got to go find an S in those days and cut it out with a razor blade. And it's this big. And you line it up with the other things you need to put in different places. You juggle them, you use the splicing tape. It was insane. And the great audio work that came out before we were using this kind of technology, those people were amazing geniuses. I'm convinced, because it was quite a task. It really was kind of Stone Age, wasn't it, David?
It really was. And Adam, I would also mention, in terms of technology, we don't physically handle a CD anymore or an LP anymore. Oh, I should tell the stories of LPs. Back in the days when we played a Mahler symphony on an LP, and side one of the fourth symphony was the beginning of the symphony, and the third and fourth movements were on when it got to the end, you had to lift the stylus off, flip it around, clean it, because how did we ever do that? Well, CDs came along and it became much easier, but we don't even do CDs anymore because all of our library is now digitized. We still keep the CDs. We need to legally show that we have purchased the music, the recordings, but it's all on a massive hard drive. And it's just so much easier to find things and to place things and to move things around than to be physically moving around and fussing with CDs all the time. So
certainly
a digitized library is a huge help also.
That's wonderful.
I don't know how many of us here today have lots of experience with LPs, but
they've come back big time recent years.
Yeah, we don't use them in broadcasting generally, but the thing is, how they used to skip. There would be a piece of music and the needle would skip and it would keep going back to the same thing over and over again. If you're not sitting right there, if for some reason you went down the hall to get another LP, it's going to keep on going until you come back in that studio and move it along. Or say you get forgetful. And of course, this would never happen to me. But if you are forgetful and you maybe take a break you needed to take and you didn't time the record properly and you get back in the studio and it's in the middle going.
Oh,
That's not a good thing.
That happened to me once. That was so embarrassing.
Yes, definitely our most embarrassing moments in broadcasting had to do with LPs. Yeah. You just think, what am I even doing here?
Thank you very much. Well, it's so nice to talk to you. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would love an opportunity to ask you some questions from our audience. Would we have a little bit of time for that? So sure. I have received several questions, out of which I chose some that I thought would be kind of different in the theme, in the topic, and kind of reflect also the interests of our audiences. And so the first question comes from one of my colleagues at the University of Northern Colorado. How do you find balance in educating your audiences and providing them with entertainment?
Such a good question. Marilyn, do you want to talk about that?
You know, it's a combination, excuse me, of the direction that you're given by the station you work for. There's some of that, and there's some of the matter of experience when you're talking on the radio. The only thing you have to communicate is your voice. You don't get gestures and you don't get facial expressions. So you have to figure out ways to make the voice be even more expressive, perhaps, than you might in circumstances where you can be seen. So there's that. And also, I think most of us want to avoid being the one of whom people are saying, gosh, when are they going to stop talking? You know, we never really want that to happen. And it's easy. You get excited about something. And for me, it's some little word thing. And it's like, well, there's this, that, and the other thing. And it's sort of like somebody waiting to hear a piece of music doesn't really need to know that. So you have to balance all of those things to remember, number one, you're communicating, you're talking to people. And number two, it's about the music. It's not about you. So that combined with the direction you get from your own station, I'm sure there are other elements I'm not thinking of, but those are the ones that come to mind right away.
There's also the point that your audience is very diverse. I mean, you have some people who are musicians who are listening, and you have some people who've never been to a concert ever before. And to be able to mix those two people together and talk to both of them is a very challenging thing. And very often it comes down to telling a story about a personal experience with music. For example, the last time I heard the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony performed, it was with the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, great orchestra on this planet. And Maurice Janssens was conducting. This is when he was their conductor. And it was such a moving performance. And several times during the performance, Janssens stopped conducting. And, you know, of course, he probably didn't have to conduct all the time anyway, because they knew what they were doing, but he stopped conducting. To me, it seemed like he stopped because he was so overwhelmed by the experience that he was having coming back from the music that he couldn't conduct. And I like to tell that story on the air because it shows how expressive this music is, especially something like a Rachmaninoff symphony, especially the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony. That's a story that a seasoned musician can relate to. And that's a story that someone who's never been to an orchestra concert before can relate to. Wow, this is unbelievable. That kind of story, I think, speaks to everybody, draws people in. And, you know, let's face it, what's this all about? It's about expression by these notes and instruments and voices that we use. And if the expression, the emotion comes to the fore, then we've done our job.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Our second question comes from our student. What advice would you have for music students in their pursuits of professional performing careers?
May I start, Marilyn?
Please.
I think I would say something that is probably forgotten a lot. Well, I shouldn't say, I don't want to speak for music schools, but I think something that has been realized recently and has shown to be very important is something to keep in mind. And that is 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a conductor walking on stage and talking was unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. Today, it's very common and people love it because the conductor becomes a person. The conductor becomes a human being with emotions and stories and so forth. And I think that's a really important thing for young musicians to keep in mind. The expression, of course, through their music and their instrument or their voice, but also the expression of talking from the stage. Why do you love this piece? How did you get introduced to this piece? The expression to audience members afterwards. Go out in the lobby afterwards and meet people. People love that. You're a human being. You're expressing yourself, and I think that really kind of seals the deal. Seals the relationship between musician and audience member, just as much as a great performance on the stage does.
Wonderful. Marilyn, did you have any thoughts?
Again, so well put. I'm not quite sure what to add, but it's true. If you're an introvert, practice being able to do extroverted behavior for concerts, because it really pays off. Again, we're still battling sometimes this sense that was around, I'd like to say decades ago and isn't now, but sometimes it is, that classical music is really only for certain people. That's not true. And everything we can do when we're involved with this music to be welcoming and inviting, we need to do that. And one of the ways to do it is to say, yeah, I'm grateful I got to play that beautiful piece by Beethoven. It brought me close to Beethoven, and I want to bring it close to you. Then you become a human when you can express that. And Beethoven himself was a guy, a pretty amazing guy, but that's the thing. This is not to be restricted from anyone. And people who say, well, I don't really like classical music, that may be so, but they've probably heard something that fits in the category that they really love. And so my job in a way is, yeah, isn't that cool? And check this out, which has these same characteristics, for example. The point being is this is so for everyone. Nobody says this better than Yo-Yo Ma, for example. He is absolutely there talking to the world and saying, this is a beautiful thing that can help us all. Let's do it together. And I think that's the key in
Wonderful.
terms of relating to an audience and having a bigger goal too. It's presenting to the world something that helps. There's plenty of things we can find that don't help. Let's focus on these to the best of our ability and see what we can accomplish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this. This actually, this answered our third question, which was, what can classical musicians do in order to raise awareness of the relevance and importance of classical music in our communities? So
well, they're all doing it now. A lot of these young musicians are just doing everything. They don't have to be in a concert hall, do they? They perform in places where some people are more comfortable going to a bar than they are to a concert hall. That makes sense. And so go play in a bar, because this really is for everybody, and it doesn't matter what you do, where you came from, what your education is. That doesn't count. What counts is this is cool. I hope you can enjoy it.
Also, a lot of music was written in a bar or for that kind of purpose too. So
starting with Telemann and the Zimmermann Cafe, right?
That's right. So, well, thank you so much for your time. It's so wonderful to see you again and to speak with you and to hear about your thoughts, your insights, and your background. It's really nice to get to know you. So now when we hear you on the radio, we'll know more about who Marilyn Cooley and David Ginder are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. This has been a great pleasure. I've done a lot of interviews, and that really is one of the, I should have mentioned also when you asked about favorite things, talking to musicians is really a favorite thing for me to do. Musicians are by nature interesting people and welcoming people, and they want to communicate with you. And I sometimes I step back and I say, why is that? And it's obvious. Music is an expression of stuff, of places and emotions and so forth. So of course a musician is going to be wanting to do that with as you're speaking words as well. So it's always a pleasure to speak with musicians, and to be on the other side of the microphone is great fun. So thank you so much for having us.
Adam, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to invite everyone to our upcoming events in the Beethoven and the Rockies concert series. Please check us out at beethovenandtherockies.com. Thank you, and see you soon.
Can't wait.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.